Please note that today's shiur begins the second line from the bottom of Daf Nun Aleph Omid Beis at the Mishnah. We continue with Nedarim and terms and trying to figure what these terms include or exclude by way of the vow. Hanoder min hacholov, someone who swears or who vows not to benefit from milk, muter b'kum. He is entitled to consume kum. Kum is whey. It's the liquid portion that separates from the thicker portion in the case of milk that's left to sit, most often in the context or in the framework of making cheese. So the oath for swearing benefit from chalav does not include kum as far as the Tana Kama is concerned. Rabbi Yossi takes a restrictive approach, a stringent approach, that the kum is prohibited as well. Min hakum, one who swears or who vows not to benefit from kum, muter b'cholav, is allowed to benefit from cholav. That, according to all opinions, kum does not imply or include milk. Abba Shol oimer hanoider min hagvina, one who swears or vows not to benefit from cheese, Ozer ba'bein melucha bein tfela. He is prohibiting himself from cheese, whether it's salted or bland. Hanoder min habasar. The Mishnah continues at the top of Nun Beis Amud Aleph. Muter beroitev ubekipa. So if one vowed not to consume basar, meat, he's allowed to partake of the roitev and the kippah. The Rosh explains, muter beroitev ubekipa, hainu dak basar. The word kippah is a reference to fragments, meat, shreddings, little pieces of meat. For roitev hanikpe b'shulei haktera, rotev is understood as gravy or soup that congeals at the bottom of a pot. The mashma basar dafka mashanikra basar. The term basar is only that which people call basar, meat. And when a person says meat, they don't imply gravy or the kippah, the meat fragments or shreddings. Rabbi Yehuda Ozer. Rabbi Yehuda says that since there is the taste of meat in the gravy and in the kippah, so it is included in basar. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Ma'isiv Asar Len Rabbi Tarfon, Beit Simshin is Bashlu Imo. An incident took place where someone had vowed not to partake of basar, and Rabbi Tarfon forbade them from even eating eggs that were cooked with the basar, with the meat. Amru lo, the Rabbanan who argue with Rabbi Yehuda said, Kain hadover, it's true the eggs are osir, emosai, but when? Bisman she'omar basar ze olai, if a person says regarding a specific piece of meat, this meat is forbidden to me, what he in effect is doing is making the meat something prohibited. In other words, halachically speaking, that piece of meat is like a piece of swine, like a piece of pork. And therefore, the eggs that are cooked with it are like eggs cooked with pork, which you would not be allowed to eat. They've absorbed the prohibited taste. Shanoider min adavar v'nesarav bacher, one who vows not to partake of a specific item, and then it gets mixed up with something else that's allowed. Im yesh boy b'noising tam, if the prohibited item imparts a taste to the permitted item, also the permitted item becomes forbidden. So that the idea of eggs becoming prohibited in the context of meat and vows, it would depend, according to the Chomim, and how the original vow was stated and the subsequent effect that would have on the eggs. So as far as the Chachamim are concerned, someone who simply forswore benefiting from meat in the general form, as opposed to specifying a specific piece of meat, the eggs in the general form would not be considered meat, but in the specific form, when a particular piece of meat was the subject of the vow, and hence prohibited, any eggs cooked with it would be prohibited based on the concept of noisein tam, of having absorbed prohibited taste. Hanoder min hayayin muter b'tavshil sheyesh bo tam yayin. A person who vowed not to consume wine is allowed to partake of food that has that was, let's say, cooked in wine, so the food has a wine taste to it. Omar kainim yayin zeh she'eni tayim. If he phrased the vow thusly, that he's prohibiting let's say a particular bottle of wine that he will not drink, the nofal l'tafshil, and some of that wine fell into a dish of food, a pot of food, im yesh bo b'nosei tam, if the wine imparts a taste into the food cooking in that pot, HaRav Ozer. The food that absorbed the wine taste after this vow had been pronounced, so the food is prohibited. This is very similar to what we described before when you vowed prohibiting a specific piece of meat. The Gemara continues at the top of Amud Beis, and here the focus of the question is certainly with regard to Shitas Rabbi Yossi. Certainly the Rashi and the Rosh, as opposed to the Ran, they learn that the kasha, that the question the Gemara is going to raise now, is actually not just on Rabbi Yossi, but it's on the approach of the Chachomim as well. And we'll try to be clearer as we go on in the Gemara text. But before we do the text, we do have a topic heading, and as we indicated, it's Liyashev Stira, an attempt to resolve what appears to be a contradiction, B'shitas HaTanoim, within the Tanaic opinions, binyan Nedarim, Hakilin Dvorim Acherim, regarding vows that include other things, Kegon HaNodim in a Cholov, one who vows not to consume milk, Ha'im Ze Kolel Kum, does that include the whey? So that's the example we already saw. And maybe to be a little more specific, we saw in such a case the Tanakama being lenient and Rabbi Yossi being restrictive. In other words, Rabbi Yossi will take the inclusive approach. That's what we saw in our Mishnah, Viraminu. And now we continue with the Gemara at the top line of Amud Beis, and it says, well, we seem to have a contradictory source. Min ho adoshim, a person vowed not to benefit from adoshim. Osur ba'ashishim, he cannot benefit from ashishim. In Gemara markings in general, and we've mentioned this many times, certainly to those who are veterans of our Gemara markings, Daf Yomi shiurim, that we hesitate translating food and plants and animals unless we have a very solid tradition as to what they are. So in this case, we have something called adoshim. It's a type of vegetation. Many like to translate as adoshim as lentils, but I am not going to guarantee that translation. Needless to say, however, adoshim is some type of plant, most likely a legume, from which you can make flour for baking purposes. So if a person vowed not to benefit from adoshim, the Tanakama says, the first opinion says, he cannot partake of ashishim. And ashishim, the Rashi says at the top line, is lechem shmuruv boi kemach shel adoshim. It's a type of bread, it's a baked item in which you find adoshim flour. The Kosovar ashishim bichlal adoshim hein. The Tanna Kama holds that when you vow not to benefit from adoshim, that will include ashishim. How about someone, according to the Tanna Kama, someone who vows not to benefit from milk? What was the Tanna Kama's opinion with regard to the whey? He said the whey is allowed. So right away we see a seeming inconsistency vis-a-vis the Tanna Kama. And furthermore, we continue in our Tanaic source here, where Rabbi Yossi Matir. Person who vowed not to benefit from adoshim is allowed to benefit from ashishim, as far as Rabbi Yossi is concerned. So Rabbi Yossi here takes the limited approach. What about Rabbi Yossi regarding someone who vowed not to consume milk? According to Rabbi Yossi, he's not allowed to consume the kum, the whey, either. That too then would present a stira, seeming contradiction. The Gemara responds, Loi kasha. Don't view this as a contradiction. Mar ki asrei, umar ki asrei. Each opinion follows the speech of his locale. Asrei means his place. Be'asra de Rabbanan, in the town of the Rabbanan, in the location of the Rabbanan, of the opinion that we refer to as the Tanna Kama, koru lechalba chalba lekuma kuma. When it comes to we'll call the dairy realm, milk is limited to milk, and is exclusive of whey, and whey is called whey and not milk. So that if you vow not to benefit from cholav, from milk, you're not including the kum. Be asrei de Rabbi Yossi lekuma nami koru le kuma de chalba. In Rabbi Yossi's locale, the term kuma is not used in isolation, but it's a compound expression. It's called kuma de chalba, the way of milk. W-H-E-Y, the way of milk. And hence, when you vowed not to consume milk, that will include anything that has as part of as part of its name milk, as the Gemara just described. So that's as far as setting up the opinions in our Mishnah, milk and kum. If you look in the Rosh and other Meforshim as well, the Rashi as well, complete the picture. Similarly with regard to the Adoshim and the Ashishim. And if we look in the Rosh together, about halfway down the Rosh commentary, we have a little star. V'chein ba'adoshim. Likewise with regard to Adoshim, ba'asr de Rabbanan, in the town of the Rabbanan, who had said that if you vow not to benefit from Adoshim, you're prohibiting yourself from Ashishim. Why? Because in the Rabbanan locale, Korul Ashishim de Adoshim. Because in the Rabbanan's locale, these Ashishim cakes are referred to as Ashishim of Adoshim. And the opposite is the case with regard to Rabbi Yossi in his locale. We continue in the Gemara, Tanya, Hanoider min hecholov muter bekum, min akum muter becholov. One who vows not to benefit from milk, not to consume milk, is allowed to consume kum. One who vows not to consume kum, the whey, is allowed to consume milk. Min hacholov muter begvina, min agvina muter becholov. One who vows not to consume milk is allowed to consume cheese. Not to consume cheese, you're allowed to consume milk. Min ha-roitav mutar b'kipa, min ha-kipa mutar b'roitav. These terms we saw before in the meat context. One vows not to consume gravy, he's allowed to consume the kipa, the meat fragments that accumulate at the bottom of a pot. If one vowed not to consume kipa, he's allowed to consume gravy. Imomar bosar zeh olai, osur bo uvarotvo ubekipo. If a person said the expression bosar zeh olai, the result of that will be that he cannot eat the meat, nor the gravy, nor the kippah. Hanodir min hayayin muter betafshil sheyesh bo tam yayin. If a person vowed not to drink wine, he's allowed to consume food that has absorbed a wine taste. Omar kainim yayin zeh she'eni tayim If a person vowed that I am not going to partake of this wine, and some of the wine in the bottle that he prohibited, some of that fell into a pot of food. If that food has absorbed a wine taste, it's a wine taste coming from that specific wine that he had prohibited upon himself, that food becomes prohibited as well. The Mishnah. When a person vows not to consume grapes, he is allowed to consume wine. If he vowed not to consume olives, he's allowed to consume olive oil. If a person phrased the vow that way, he said, I restrict myself from consuming these olives and grapes. Ozer bohen uvayoytze mehen. He cannot consume those grapes nor olives, and he cannot consume the oil or wine made from them either. Boi Rami Bar Chama. With regard to the last point mentioned in the Mishnah, and we have some dashed underlining that you might note, Rami Bar Chama asks, in order for the vow to actually restrict the yotzim and the liquids, the oil and the wine, which language aspect of the vow is the trigger of the prohibition, or is responsible for the prohibition? Elu dafka o she'eni to'em dafka? Which of these expressions, when he says kainim zeisim vanovim elu, would that be enough to restrict him from the wine and oil that results from those zeisim vanovim? Or kainim zeisim vanovim she'eni toyem, would that be enough to restrict the yotzim mehen? That's basically Rami Bar Chama's question. We have a bracketed section. If you skip the bracketed section, Omarova Toshma, the diamond introduces an attempt to answer that question. So, as far as the attempt to answer Rami Bar Chama's question, you have to wait till after the bracketed section. Within the brackets, the Gemara focuses on one side of Rami Bar Chama's question. So we have, we'll say, within the brackets, an analysis of the question. After the brackets, we have the Gemara attempting to answer Rami Bar Chama's question. With that having been said, let's go now into the bracketed section. I salka daitoch elu dafka. If you were to take the side that all that's needed in order to prohibit the yotzimehen, the shemen and yayin, the oil and wine, is the word elu. In other words, the vower would say kainim zeisim vanovim elu. So if that's the dafka, the specific word that prohibits the yotzimehen, that which exudes forth from them, she'eni toyem lomali. What's the purpose of the Mishnah adding she'eni toyem? The Mishnah was trying to teach how, by referring to the zeisim anovim, would you prohibit the yotzim mehen. So why does the Mishnah add, if elu is enough, why does it add the phrase she'eni toyem? The Gemara answers, the Mishnah would be teaching us the following. If you have someone that said, kainim zeisim ve'anovim she'eni toyem, even though he said she'eni toyem, ideomar elu mitzar, only if he adds the word elu, would the yotzimehen, would the liquids be prohibited? V'lo, if he doesn't add that, lo, then by saying merely she'eni toyem, that would not be enough. So this is an analysis of Rami Bar Chama's question on a theoretical level. Theoretically, if elu was enough, so what was the purpose of the Mishnah adding she'eni toyem? And we just saw the answer to that. But now, bottom line, we still want to know which expression is the trigger or the catalyst for imposing the prohibition on wine and oil as well. So, Omar Rava Tashma, the diamond shape that you see here, and if you skim down the page, you can see we have a number of additional ones. On the side of the Gemara, we've written under the Nosei Mivne heading in our margin. What the diamonds do is they're nisyonos. We've written on the side nisyonos lifshoit hashe'ela, attempts to answer the question Ha'im elu dafka o she'ani toyem dafka. Kedei shegam hayotzmem ticholel beneder. Which of these expressions is binding in order to prohibit the liquids that come forth? B'mi shomar, in regarding someone who said kainim zeisim elu she'eni toyem osir bo'en uveyotzem mehen. Regarding that which we saw in the Mishnah, which expression is necessary in order for the vow to include the yayin and shemen. So Omar Rava Tashma, we're at the first diamond, and we're quoting from what we refer to here as the Reisha. We're going to refer later, the next diamond, to the Seifa, hence we've added that point now. So it says in the following Tanaic source, which is really a Mishnah that appears on Daf Nun Zayin, Kainim Peiros Ha'elu Olai. He doesn't mention She'eni Toyem. He says Kainim Peiros Ha'elu Olai. Kainim Hein Lepi. Or he uses that expression, Osir B'chilufein Uvegiduleihen. What becomes prohibited is anything that is offered in exchange for these fruits. Person says, referring to a bowl of fruits that sits on his table, I prohibit them upon myself. The result is that those fruits, if they're, let us say, sold and you get money in exchange for it, that's chilufein, the money is prohibited to you. And if you plant those fruits and new growth develops, those will be prohibited as well. But now we can infer, ha b'yoytze mehen muter. If the fruits are processed into liquid, oil or wine, that would be okay. What do we see then? That the use of the word elu is lav dafka. It's not the essential word in order to prohibit the liquids that exude forth. So you would then conclude, if you were to stop here, that in order to include in the vow the liquids, you would have had to say she'eni toyem, kainim peris elu olai she'eni toyem. The Gemara says, no, don't conclude what we just suggested. Hu adin dafilu b'yotzmem oser. As far as a person who said kainim peris ha'elu olai, that would prohibit the yotzim, the liquids that come forth from them as well. You'll ask, so why wasn't mention made in the source of that? V'ha adifa leilashminan. The source had a specific agenda. It was more important. It was better. It was for it to teach that by saying kainim peris ha'elu olai, that even the chilufein and the giduleihem are prohibited. And we look at Rashi together, a few lines down. Ho adifa shmina the chilufein afagav dalal hafu gufayu. Even though the chilufein it's money that you get in exchange for the fruits, even though it's not the actual fruits. Kigidulin damu. It's halachically like the growth that comes forth from it. If you planted it, that certainly would be Ozer. So this source had a specific agenda to emphasize the prohibition on the chilufein, but not, the purpose of this source was not to suggest that yotzim mehen would be mutter. Toshma. We try again to determine our Rami Bar Chama's question. We quote now from the Seifa, the continuation of that Mishnah. She'eni oichel v'she'eni toyem muter b'chilufein uv'gilulem. If he says kainim peros she'eni oichel or she'eni toyem, he is allowed to benefit from the chilufin and the gidulin. the exchange and the growth. We can infer ha hayoytze mehen ozer, but the liquids that exude forth, that would be prohibited. So what do you see? You see that the she'eni to'em expression is the key expression. That's dafka. That's the expression that will prohibit the shemen and the yayin, the exusion. The Gemara says, don't conclude that. That's not, in other words, that's not what this source is trying to tell me, but rather, Aidi de lo nosiv bereisha yoytze mehen, since the reisha didn't speak about the yoytze mehen, lo nosiv nami seifa yoytze mehen. The seifa doesn't make mention of the yoytze mehen either. In theory, though, if you have the seifa, so just like the Sheini Toyim leaves the Chilufin and Gidulim as allowed, it could be that the Yotzei Mehen would also be allowed. Toshma, Omar Rabbi Huda, Maisiv also Rabbi Tarfon Alai, Beitzim Shenizbashlu Imo. The case that we saw in the Mishnah of someone having prohibited himself from meat, Rabbi Tarfon said that you cannot partake of the eggs that were cooked together with the meat. Amru lo kein hadovar. The Rabbanan said to Rabbi Yehuda, that's true that the eggs cooked with meat could become prohibited, but emosai. When is that? Bisman shomar basar zeh olai. Now here we want to emphasize that the term zeh is the singular form of the word elu. So it's like we saw before in the Rami Bar Chama's question, which was a reference to the Mishnah, who a guy said, someone said, Kainim zeisim vanofim elu. So this is a parallel case. Basar zeh olai is like the case of zeisim vanofim elu, and the result of saying Basar zeh olai, shanoidu min adovar v'nisarav bi'achir v'yesh boi b'noi seitam. If a person vowed not to benefit from a specific item, and that prohibited item that we say prohibited, he imposed the prohibition on himself, it then got mixed in with other food that is permitted, but in that other food, v'yesh boi b'noi seitam, there is a perceptible taste of the item concerning which you vowed, HaRav Ozer, the other item becomes prohibited. What do we see from this? We see that when you say elu, that creates an isur that extends to other things. You will find that the Tosfos commentary hones this point to a precise point of clarity. 4 lines from the bottom of the Tosfos commentary, Basar zeh olai, also b'no seitam. As we saw in the source, if you phrased your vow basar zeh olai, things that are cooked with the basar, that absorb the basar, the meat taste, those items are forbidden also. Umedami yoytze mehen, what the Gemara is doing is comparing the original question that Rami Bar Chama raised concerning the Mishnah's law of yoytze mehen l'noisein tam. Dechihechi de'osra de'nafshei ki de'omar basar zeh olai b'nosein tam. Just like when someone says basar zeh olai, things that have basar taste, that are cooked with the basar that you prohibited, are also prohibited. Hachinami osur yoytze mehen. Likewise, yoytze mehen, the exusion from those items would also be prohibited. And the word v'zeh, the word basar zeh, we said olai, that word zeh, hainu kamo elu, like the word elu that we saw in the Mishnah, as we mentioned before. Zeh is simply the singular form of elu. Alma, what we see from this, the be'elu mitzar yoytze mehen, that the elu expression is the key word for having the vow include also the liquids that exude forth. Well, the Gemara continues. We're not finished with this discussion. The Gemara says, "Be'elu lo kamebaya lon de dafku. As far as the use of the word elu is not even a point of question. Romi Bar Chama wouldn't have raised a question concerning the effectiveness or the results of the word elu. In other words, it's clear that elu includes, if you say koinen peris elu alai, that will certainly include the liquids that exude forth. Ki mebayalon, the question that is raised by Romi Bar Chama is b'sheni toyem dafka oy lav dafka. What about using that expression? If a person were to say koinen peros she'eni toyem, will that include the yotzei mehen or not? Toshma. So here we have an attempt to answer, and the unusual looking diamond that you see here is because up till now the first three diamonds were evaluating the expression of elu as well. In other words, we were judging both expressions up till now. At this point, we say that we don't have to investigate both expressions. It's the one expression is clear; it's not part of any doubt. But only one expression, and that's what we're going to focus on now. So, what does it say in the source? Dog dogim she'eni toyem. Here he doesn't use the word elu. He says dog dogim she'eni toyem osur bohen bein dolim bein tanim bein chayim bein mevushalim umuter betoris trufa ubetzir. For our purposes, we don't have to go over the details, we've already learned them, but we want to focus on the dashed underlining. We see a person using the expression she'eni toyem, and we see that it will not include the tzir. The tzir is the brine. That's an example of something that comes forth from the fish. So that the she'eni toyem expression is lav dafka. Is not the, we'll say, it's not the dafka, the key expression that would impose prohibition on yotzei mehen. The Gemara rejects this. Omar Rova, ukvar yotza mehen. This source that says mutter b'taras trufa b'tzir, this is a reference to someone that had prepared fish brine before he ever vowed. So the man has brine in his possession, and then he vows dog dogim she'eni toyem. In a case like that, true, the brine is allowed. However, if he has no brine, and he were to say dog dogim she'eni toyem, the brine that would be forthcoming might very well be prohibited. And we look in Rashi, 3 lines from the bottom. Oma Rava, Tritz. You can re-explain. Hadekatani muter b'tzir, the declaration of the source that one is allowed to partake of the tzir, the brine. Shekvar yotzaman kodim shenodar. It's brine that came before he ever vowed. Ulahachi muter, and that's why that brine is allowed. Avol im la'achar shenodar yotzamehen. But if you have a person who first vowed and then the brine issued forth, li'olam eim aloch the Ozer, I will tell you that brine would be prohibited, she'eni toyem dafka, and that the she'eni toyem expression is effective in prohibiting the yotzei mehen, that which exudes forth. With that, we conclude our shiur for today.